Okay, so yes, I'm Simon Thompson. I'm a senior R&D engineer at the BBC, and we were invited to do this in about February, so it's taken a while for us to actually turn up. So I've been at BBC R&D for 16 years now. I think I only went for 2 to see what it was like, and been there for 16. I'm a member of the UHD TV team that works mainly across production, but we also work a little bit with the distribution side. I also work with other broadcasters and international bodies. I'm the UK's EBU production video systems representative, and for my sins I do edit that horrendous document, which is the user requirements for video monitoring in television. If anyone ever needs to try and get to sleep, that's the document to download and read. It's about 100 pages of what measurements you need to make to a video monitor to decide if you can use it or not. I put down that I'm a member of SMPTE because I know that everyone from DMUX loves SMPTE. I'm getting that vibe all night. And I'm also a chartered electronic engineer. So I was asked to come and talk about UHD TV at the BBC. So I thought I'd start with what actually is ultra-high definition television. There's actually been 2 attempts at it. This attempt was late 2012, ITUR recommendation BT 2020. All they put in there was more pixels, 2 different sets of more pixels, wider color gamut and higher frame rate. We did quite a lot of testing, both within the BBC and within the EBU, and the higher frame rates were good, wider color gamut was good, but we didn't think the more pixels was enough. For something that was going to be very expensive to do, we just didn't think that going up to 3840 by 2160 was going to be enough. You typically need a TV in the region of 65 to 70 inches to be able to start to see the difference. And not many people in the UK are going to go for that for the next 10 years or so. Although it is starting to creep up in the mid 50 inches now. There was a second attempt late 2015. That was to add high dynamic range, which is the main thing I've been working on for the past 3 or 4 years. They couldn't. The way the ITU works is it's a body of the United Nations, and every member of the United Nations has to agree to something before it can go into one of these ITU documents. So there was no agreement between which type of HDR to go in there, so both types are in there. Hybrid log gamma perceptual quantizer. Just a little note, 4K is a cinema specification, so we don't use it in broadcasting, but a lot of the TV vendors use the term for UHD1. Sometimes they use 4 with a big K to differentiate from 4 with a little k. I'd rather they didn't. So more colors. UHD covers most of the naturally occurring colors, but not all fluorescent or artificial colors. So if you look at this chart, the sort of horseshoe shape, the big horseshoe shape is all of the colors in the world. The blue dashed line is all of the naturally occurring colors in the world, so things that aren't chemically manufactured. The green line, the green triangle is the amount of color that an HD TV can show. And the cyan line is what a UHD TV can show. The red line is what you get in a modern cinema. So you can see that the cyan line just about covers all of the naturally occurring colors and quite a bit of the non-natural colors in the world. So just to show the sort of effect that this has, there's a guy on the internet called Dot Color who every Wednesday takes a picture and shows you which bits of the picture you can show on a UHD panel and which bits you can't. So the one on the left, the bits that are covered in grey, those are the colours that you can't show on an HD TV. So typically we find that bright, well-lit, natural images, you're losing half the colours being represented incorrectly on a HD TV display. This one's quite bad. It's actually over 70%. This one I borrowed off Vlad, wherever he is. This is one of your videos that you sent me. Just to show you that in the sort of video that we create, we've got a waveform monitor and a vector scope showing that quite a lot of the colors, and even something simple like a football match, are well outside the color gamut that an HD TV can display. Especially the football strips, and the quite a large area of the grass is usually outside the what an HD TV can do. Certainly at the World Cup last year, they actually measured the football kits of the 26 nations that were appearing, and about 24 of them were not able to be displayed properly on an HD TV monitor. The other thing that we really wanted to do was to look at better tonal range. So we moved towards high dynamic range. So what do we mean by that? We want to do correct reproduction in the highlights, correct reproduction in the shadows, and displayed perceptually correctly. So most people will have had that effect where they've been using their digital camera, and if you focus on the person, then you lose all the detail in the sky. If you focus on the sky, the person's too dark. So that's the area that we're really trying to fix, so that you can have a true perceptual image with highlights in the right place. Better motion portrayal, higher frame rates. So in that spec, there's 100 frames per second, 120 frames per second, and unfortunately 120,000 over 1,001 frames per second, which is 119.88 recurring. So the reason that you have these odd frame rates in America is in 1952-53, when they came up with the NTSC standard. The color signal filtering wasn't very good, and it bled through into the audio. That was fixed about 2 years later, but they've had the frigged value for the frame rate in there ever since. America didn't actually want 120,000 over 1,001. It was Sweden that put that in. We'll never know why. So UHD TV at the BBC, more pixels was not enough. More pixels requires a large screen to give a perceptual benefit, and better color and motion portrayal work for all at all screen sizes. So Definition Magazine took the document that we wrote with the EBU and said that the EBU act like our vision guardians, if you like. They are saying that a straight increase in resolution like we had from SD to HD is not the answer. So the other question we get asked quite a lot is, why did it take so long? HD TV, from the first time we showed it in public to the time that it went out on broadcast, was 24 years. So the first public demo of HD TV was at IBC in 1982, and we got a channel on air in 2006. UHD TV, we had a public demo at IBC 2015, and we were on air. Well, we were on iPlayer 2017. So it's been very compressed this time. There's been an awful lot of standards written, but it seems that the time that in the consumer electronics arena, the time that you have to do things is now a lot shorter than people are used to, and quite a few of the standards organisations are now having to change quite quickly to try and meet up with people's expectations. So just to have a look at this, the ITU write the standards for baseband video. MPEG do the standards for encoding. SMPTE do the standards for professional professional contribution and distribution circuits. DPP do the file delivery specs for the UK. HDMI do the HDMI spec. EBU do all of the interoperation between European broadcasters. CES do the spec that HDMI is based on. DV do the direct-to-home specs. HBB-TV do the apps. DTG do the UK profiling of DVB and HBB-TV. W3C do the web color forum. And then we've got a few others in there, like the UHD Alliance, UHD Forum, 4K HDR immersive, and Aces, who do sort of peripheral specs that are used more by equipment manufacturers. So BBC and R&D have had to be involved with all of these organizations to get the spec from 2015 to 2017 to get the spec into a position where we can actually display stuff at home. So, short history. The design brief we had at BBC was to create some natural looking images. That might sound a bit odd, but HD video cannot display natural images. If you point a camera out of the window, an HD camera outputs a signal that's more saturated and has different highlight levels to what's actually happening in the real world. So we took the decision that for UHD TV we wanted natural looking images as a base. Once you've got those natural looking images, you can add saturation, you can make them more punchy. But if you can't do the natural looking images to begin with, then you're stuck with what the camera outputs. We wanted it to cover a greater range than the eye in one adaptation state, and I'll go into what that means in a minute. And what we wanted to get away from was the oversaturated HD image, and also HD images having quite a small dynamic range because of the way that it was designed. HD was designed at the time when CRTs were still in use. So all of the flat panels that have been used for HD since about 2004 were all better than the HD signal that we were sending to them. So they could have done better. They could have had higher dynamic range. So we used to do some pretty horrendous things called camera knees to try and get more dynamic range into the signal, which the non-CRTs could use. So just to go over vision, human visual system, if there's no light, there's no black. That might sound a bit odd, but if you go into a totally dark room, you'll actually see grey because of the way the eyes work. So you need to have some light there to actually be able to see black. So objects under starlight come out about 0.01 nits, and they're using the rods in the eyes. And it goes all the way through to direct sunlight, which is anywhere up to 100,000 nits. What you can't do, though, is see all of that at once. So what happens in the is that, not working, the total sensitivity of the human visual system is about 30 stops. So stops a doubling of light level. But simultaneously, you can only see about 14 doublings. And your eye will change sensitivity and change the size of the iris to move up and down. So it depends on what the brightness of the room that you're in as to what level your eye is going to adapt to. And HDR digital cameras always have been out since about 2008, 2009 with cameras from the likes of Arri, Canon, and Sony. They can do the same simultaneous range as the eye can, and then you'll see that an SDR TV display does significantly less than the eye can. So what we've traditionally done is crushed the highlights and got rid of some of the shadow detail and crushed the highlights to get it to fix onto an SDR, onto a HD TV display. So HD TVs have poor black levels and they only go up to about 200 candelas per meter squared. 8-bit precision in digital distribution only gives you about 5 or 6 stops. So what you start to see is if you stretch the signal too much, you make it brighter and brighter and brighter, you start to see banding happening in your highlights. And that happens quite a lot. The reason that happens is that your screen's too bright. It's brighter than the signal is designed to go to. So TVs have been doing some horrible things over the years, like adding noise in the highlights to make that look less like that. And modern displays far exceed the capability of the HD TV standards. So on a day like this, what you really want to be able to do is see detail in the dark areas of the picture and see detail in the bright areas of the picture. and display both of them on your TV at roughly the right levels, perceptually, without having to clip anywhere. So the first HDR system came from Dolby in America. It's PQ, Perceptual Quantizer. What they decided to do was to cover the entire range of most of the range of the human visual system, and then add some screen adaptation metadata. Because obviously your screen can do 14 stops and the signal's got 28 stops in it. You have to tell the screen how to, what transform to do to the signal to make it fit on the screen. And this works really quite well for a certain set of requirements, that main requirement being cinema. The problem that we had was the screen adaptation metadata. The basic screen adaptation metadata is the program's average light level, and you can't work out what the average light level is until after the program's finished, so you can't really use it for live. They did have a system where they set what the program average light level was and then adjusted the lighting in the stadium to try and match it, but that didn't really work as well as they were hoping. And also, the second problem is that it relies on the human. You have to know what the state the human visual system is in, so which 14 stops you've adapted to be able to adapt the screen to it. So without knowing the exact brightness level of the room, you can't do that adaptation. So when the first HDR Blu-rays came out, there was quite a lot of complaints that they were looking too dark. And the reason they were looking too dark was that they were assuming that you were watching it in the same room brightness level as what they'd graded it in. And grading rooms are really dark. So sort of sitting in your front room with all of the lights off, no phone on, you might just get your room down to the right level to watch a video that's running using that system. It is getting better. Screens now come with methods of measuring the ambient light level. But we decided with hybrid log gamma that we'd do something different. We've sent the signal, and we've actually published what a screen should do to adapt itself for different brightnesses of screen and different brightnesses of room. So instead of sending the entire human visual range, we just send the range that we're interested in showing you, and the screen does the adaptation to that so that it fits on the screen. So there's two slightly different methods. Because we're not sending any metadata with this, we don't have to do any calculations about what's in the video. Therefore, we can just send the video stream by itself, and all of the adaptation is based on the capabilities of the screen and the room that it's in. So there's no metadata that needs to be sent with the video signal. So our first big UHD TV event was Zurich 2014 Athletics, which was run by the European Broadcasting Union. It wasn't live. It wasn't live. Most of the cameras were cinema cameras because that's all that were available at that time. There was one live camera, but it was just recorded. And it wasn't an HDR shoot, but we were able to regrade all of the content to HDR at a later date. We did quite a few test shoots. So America's Cup World Series, we were invited by BT Sport to go along and run a test with ARRI cameras there. We took some cameras up to the Eurovision 60th anniversary party and listened to some terribly cheesy Europop. We went to the Edinburgh Tattoo and we actually did a live out of the One Show studio. So the One Show studio is the first studio in the world to do live UHD TV. We did some testing and development. So I did a lot of work on the effect of ambient lighting on how you perceive a TV screen. Skin tones, how you should show skin tones in a video signal. Conversion, so HDR to SDR, SDR to HDR, and conversion between HDR formats, because some of the big studio, which is mainly looking at doing Blu-ray delivery, doesn't have the problems of live TV, therefore can use other systems. We did a lot of work on brightness measurement, because one of the things you can do with a very bright TV is make a video that is really painful to watch. So there's a brightness measurement meter that one of my colleagues has developed to make sure that we don't actually go beyond what your pain threshold whilst you're watching it. And also what screen controls need to be available to the end user. We did some real productions. So FIFA World Cup 2014 was SDR only. Blue Planet 2 was the first HDR show. Top Gear, sort of. Top Gear was, we made one segment of Top Gear, but because there was only one car from one manufacturer in it, we were never allowed to show it. It failed editorial policy. Planet Earth 2, we made that. Royal Wedding of Their Royal Highness the Duke and Duchess of Sussex last year. So that was a split HDR production. The world feed was a down convert from the HDR. So the down converter that was in use was getting watched by 1.8 billion people, which was a bit worrying as we only finished writing it in the car park on the Friday night. FIFA World Cup 2018, we did the studio feed in HDR and then took the host broadcaster's HDR feed, combined them and put them out on iPlayer. We've done 2 Wimbledons, and this year we did the FA Cup final. And the big one last year was the Berlin Athletics Championship, which was quite a lot of broadcasters and quite a lot of equipment manufacturers. And it was the world's first UHD, high frame rate, wide color gamut, high dynamic range, object-based audio shoot, and it was broadcast by satellite. There's not many receivers could get it, but there was about 2 places in the UK managed to receive it. So creating UHD TV, if you're doing something that's not live, it's relatively straightforward. For a drama or high-end production, everyone uses color grading software. And the camera manufacturers give you an input device transform. You set your output device transform to HDR, and the only thing you need that's different is a HDR monitor. It's quite expensive HDR monitor, but still they're becoming quite usual to find in grading suites. If you're going for simple production, there's quite a lot of cameras on the market that will now record directly in HDR, and you just use it like ordinary video. You just have to remember to have the correct switch enabled in the editing software. And it's now really starting to become available at a prosumer level. So there's quite a lot of HLG cameras now available. And YouTube last year actually put out some open source software to show you to do all of the various switches and I think you can even put in a 3D lookup table if you want, so that it'll when it does the down conversion to SDR, you can tell it how you want it to do the down conversion. Live's a different ball game, unfortunately. So the first thing is broadcast cameras have a split control. So the guy that you're seeing with the camera on the pitch is actually only doing the framing and focus. Everything else goes on in the OB truck, which is where you're setting the exposure and color of the cameras. So you might have, for the Royal Wedding, we had 76 cameras. So you have 76 camera control units with 20-something guys, each doing 5 or 6 cameras, trying to match they try and match all of the cameras that they have in front of them to the program output. And that's all done live on a panel with about 25 switches on it, doing all of the various color tweaks you can think of, choosing how big an iris you want, gain in all of the various channels. So that's all done live by the guys in the truck. Live production depends on real-time transforms. So for any camera, you come out of the camera sensor, you apply something called the electro-optical transfer function. And then at the TV end, you apply the opto-electrical transfer function. I've got those the wrong way around, sorry. At the camera, you apply the optoelectrical transfer function, and at the screen, you apply the electro-optical transfer function. I'll change that slide. And you have to be able to swap the signals between the two. So I'll show you the bit later, but there's basically two ways of doing it. You either try and go back to what the camera's seeing, which matches cameras of different types, or you try and match what the monitors are seeing, which doesn't necessarily look the same. So up until 2018, we had 2 mixers in the truck. Each mixer is about £250,000. These mixers took in all of the cameras, I think it's, in either HDR or SDR. We slaved the HDR mixer off the SDR mixer and had 2 outputs coming out of the truck. This requires quite a lot of, so for every camera that's not an HDR camera, you need to put in some sort of converter, and for every pre-recorded source that's not a HDR source, you have to put in a converter. We tried to simplify that this year. From the FA Cup final onwards, we got rid of one of the mixers, so that means that it gives you access to a lot more OB trucks, because not all OB trucks have 2 mixers. We got rid of one of the big issues that you have in live TV, which is how you what you're looking at whilst you're doing the grading, the racking. And all we did for BBC One was take a down convert of our HDR output. So anyone who watched the FA Cup final this year was watching a down convert from the HDR program. There was no HD program made. It's a bit more complicated than that, because you've got the 20 guys in the truck all trying desperately to control the camera. You have to decide which signal they're going to look at. So at the moment, what we're doing is giving all of the guys in the truck the same down converter that we're using to create the BBC One signal. That means that the cameras should match exactly what's going out on BBC One on the HD channel. It does mean that there isn't anyone in the truck really looking at the HDR signal or adjusting the HDR signal. You're just assuming that that's following. It does follow quite well, but there are 1 or 2 slight issues with that I can discuss later on. The real end game where everyone would like to get to is that you make an HDR program and you look at the HDR and you have this fantastic down converter that does everything and can take any input you throw at it, and it'll create some nice looking SDR. We're not at that point at the moment, so you have to be quite careful on what you do in the HDR domain to make sure you don't ruin what's happening on BBC One HD, because BBC One HD is the major project at the moment, major product. You have a few tens of thousands watching the UHD HDR. You have anywhere up to 25 million watching the HD, so you can't really damage your HD at the moment. So the future, there's still a few simplifications to make. One of the issues of going to a full HDR production is just the cost of the monitors at the moment. The sort of monitor that you use in a truck for monitoring an HD signal is probably £3,000 to £5,000. The sort of monitor that you need to put in a truck to monitor HDR is in the region of £30,000. So if you need 20 monitors in a truck, it soon starts to add up into the well over £500,000 if you want to go down the HDR route at the moment. Still some process updates required. It's silly little things like color bars. We traditionally send color bars down over the satellite before the match starts, and that allows every station further down the line to check that your color bars are coming through correctly, which means that your video is going to come through correctly. And things like 3D lookup tables, which are in use for conversion, don't actually line up. So you get complaints coming back from various monitoring points further down the chain that that you're not hitting the targets on their monitoring equipment. So we have started to do some work on that in the EBU. There's still some standards required. There's currently no standard for a still image HDR. There's the standard for subtitles is still hasn't been ratified. So the main video is all there. The main video processing is all there. It's just the stuff around the outside that we need to get right now. It's still probably only going to be trial productions for the foreseeable future. That's just because it's still difficult to do. It's still not business as usual, but it's probably within the next year it will become business as usual. And we're working to develop production workflows and trials with EBU partners. The reason we do that is the EBU represent all of the public service broadcasters in the European broadcasting area, which is 85 broadcasters. If they're all using the same workflow, that means that all the trucks can be built the same, all of the equipment that's required is the same, and it means hiring equipment becomes easier. So thanks for that. Any questions on HDR?